This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host Gilad Halpern.
And I'm your co-host, Dahlia Shenlin.
If you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. We're counting on you and every little helps. Every week we bring you interviews with authors of books and research on essential topics and other things that we like, including films. This episode is sponsored by the German government. Germany is now holding the EU presidency for the second half of 2020. And as our listeners know, the Tel Aviv Review is holding a special series examining Israel's relationship with the EU and Germany and the role in the region, as well as other pertinent issues.
Today, we're very excited to host someone who's a little bit off of our beaten track. It's been ages since any of us went to the movies, so we decided to bring them here. We're going to be discussing a film today. David Ozit is a very busy filmmaker. He has worked as a film director, editor, and composer. He's an alumnus of the Berlinale Talent Campus and the Sundance Nonfiction Directors Residency. David holds a BA in Middle East and North Africa Studies from the University of Michigan. He studied refugee law at the American University of Cairo, received his MFA in social documentary film from the School of Visual Arts. He even made time to win an Emmy Award. David's most recent production is called Mayor, which he directed, released in 2020. This film has been shown at between 50 and 60 different film festivals. It's currently showing in about 100 virtual cinemas, soon to be available for worldwide purchase from the website mayorfilm.com. The film has received great reviews, big shout out in the New York Times, and therefore we're thrilled to welcome you to the show. David, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You know, the film opens with a statement that Ramallah is a city in transition. And I want to ask you, what is it in transition from and to?
Well, I should probably preface this and say just a little bit about what the film is about, in that it's about the mayor of Ramallah, which is the de facto capital of Palestine. It's the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. It's a city of about 60,000 people. It's historically a Christian city. And you know, it's a fascinating city. I spent a lot of time there off and on in my life and career, even before I was working in film. I was always struck by its contrasts, and the fact that in the same breath as there being hipster bars and cafes and nightclubs and free unlimited public Wi-Fi, there's also refugee camps within the city limits and checkpoints not too far from the city, expats, snow in the winter, all these things that also really jarred against my, as a North American, really jarred against my perceptions of what a Palestinian city would look like or could look like, or even should look like. And I think that dissonance between what I imagined a Palestinian city to be and what Ramallah really is, I think really fueled this interest I had personally in trying to make a film in this part of the world that added imagery to the idea of what Palestine could look like. Because I do think that, especially where I am right now here in the U.S., there's a very monolithic understanding of this part of the world, and I think that it makes it very difficult to have any real nuanced conversations, especially when it comes to human rights or any of the issues that come up regarding this topic, to really look at it with any nuance if we're seeing things so monolithically. So that was the first thing I noticed, is just that this city was so compellingly complicated, and that its mayor was also this compelling, complicated character who was a Christian, because the mayor has to be Christian by law. And I was just really intrigued to ask this question to myself. And in the process of making this film, how do you run a city when you don't have a country? How do you run a city underneath an occupation? And I think that transition is a mental one, and a sociological one, and also one that channels just the current zeitgeist of the moment, of people in Palestine who are no longer just behind a wall. The internet and the flattening of our, popular world and popular media makes it much more easy to imagine a better future for yourself than it even was possible 10 years ago.
I think Gilad and I were both a little surprised by what you said, that Ramallah has to have a Christian mayor by law. Can you explain that to us?
As far as I understand it, it's an old Ottoman law. It's an old Ottoman tradition where back when the entirety of that land was under Ottoman control, the Jewish towns had Jewish mayors, the Muslim towns had Muslim mayors, the Christian towns had Christian mayors. And a lot of these smaller towns, Ramallah being one of them, it's like I said, it's not a large city, and it was historically a sort of resort town and a resort village. It's got a beautiful location on the hills, so it gets a nice breeze, and it was kind of a Jordanian vacation spot in the 60s and prior to 67. And it's settled by 5 original Christian families, and the descendants of those families are the ones who run for mayor every 4 years.
So tell us about Musa Hadid, the mayor, the protagonist of the movie. Who is he? What's his story? And also, why did you choose to focus on him specifically? I mean, a mayor, especially this man, despite all the complexities, is often just, a lackluster bureaucrat. So why the mayor?
Well, I think in part the idea of a lackluster bureaucrat was appealing to me because I think that a film about Palestine, I think, is, and it's certainly about Palestinian leadership, is in some ways trading in this notion of the limits of agency and the limits of power. And I felt like the position of mayoralty is one of the most potent ways to explore that theme. There's only so much that Musa is capable of doing as mayor, and the film really orbits that. And also, the job of a mayor almost worldwide is basically universal. And I was excited to focus on a position that would lend a little bit more relatability to Musa's work. I think that there are very few government positions or elected positions where it's essentially, if you do something right, people just kind of nod silently. And if you do something wrong, everyone will blame everything on you. And that's true of the mayor, I'm sure, of Tel Aviv. I know it's true of the mayor of New York City, where I live and call home. I think it's true absolutely everywhere in the world. And there was something that was simultaneously universal, but I do think that universality exposes the cracks where you realize the limits of Musa's power in this film, that there's only so much he can do in terms of running his city and being able to build a sewage treatment plant, because the sewage treatment facility needs to be built so many kilometers away from Ramallah. So many kilometers away from Ramallah is no longer Area A, which means it's no longer under the PA's jurisdiction, which means that he can't get approvals in a timely fashion, which means that he can't build a sewage treatment plant. These are things that most mayors in the world obviously don't have to deal with. He can't get approval for cemeteries. He can't travel outside of his city. Things like that, of course, I think highlighted what the landscape of the film is, this sort of, the banality and the humor sometimes and the absurdity of local government. But in stark contrast are the things that Musa just simply can't control.
Was it very hard to get his consent to cooperate? I mean, not so much out of suspicion, this American coming here and, looking to fail us. But, did you have to pick up his jaw from the floor when you said, I want to make a movie about you?
No, well, I was more tactful than that when we first met. I told him I wanted to make a film about the municipality because I could tell he was proud of it. And I was impressed by it. And I wanted to show it to the West. I wanted to show it to the world. I don't believe that anyone shows up in a documentary unless there's something that they either want to say or there's something that they're trying to say and they want it amplified. And basically, I feel like we had the same goal. Musa, you see him traveling around the world and essentially becoming an ambassador, even though he's trying to run his city. He ultimately has to become some sort of a Palestinian ambassador to the West, and in part because he plays the part. He's Christian. He speaks English. He's charming. He's funny. He's charismatic. He wears a suit. He's kind of everything that Western countries want a Palestinian leader to look like. And there's sort of almost a performance of respectability that comes along with that, which is, I think, hoisted on certainly colonized countries, but countries from the global South in general. And I think that goes back to one of your earlier questions about why this mayor, why Musa. But I think there's something really admirable about the the composure and dignity that he maintains and carries himself with. And I was really impressed by just trying to convey that to a Western audience. And I think that that's something that he's, of course, deeply invested in conveying to a Western audience as well. It's just I'm the one with the camera.
I want to go back to what you said about him taking pride in the municipality. I found his character not at all lackluster. In fact, I found it maybe understated, but poignant in a way. And I think that that pride indicates a sort of deep commitment to the city, the people. We see him greeting residents of the city throughout the film, trying to help on big and very small things. But the poignancy comes because he also is, as you've pointed out, somewhat powerless, and his power is limited. Gilad and I were discussing that it even reminded me of a very iconic Israeli film in which the character is fictional, but he's a sort of aging policeman who can't really maintain his level of authority, but it's a very beautiful, sensitive treatment of that situation. What is it about Musa's position that makes it poignant in your eyes, if you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. But I think it's kind of what we were just talking about. There's only so much he can do, and so the film. Just to give a little bit of the the film kind of focuses very on his work and his bureaucracy really tightly in the beginning, and then the first 15 minutes. I think you're realizing, this isn't the film about the quote unquote Israel-Palestine situation. It's a film about a man who's trying to run his Christmas celebrations and trying to plan this, event where Santas are going to parkour from the rooftops in a flash mob and descend upon the town square of Ramallah with its Christmas tree.
To trance music, we should say. To trance, some sort of
to trance music, yes, to a trance remix of Jingle Bells. And this is all very serious. And this is a very serious project for the municipality. And I think that one of my job in part as a director is to give you the same emotional experience of discovery that I have when I'm filming, because I'm not going into these films knowing exactly what I want to say. I'm only going in knowing what questions I want to ask. And that question of what is this job? What is this man's job like? I wanted to ask that question. And for me, I'm filming these moments where they're having these very serious, heated conversations about at what point when's the flash mob start? How do we light the tree? What song do we play? And I'm watching all of this personally, as an outsider thinking, well, this seems like an inordinate amount of effort for a Christmas celebration, and perhaps this is even maybe even a little too much work to go into something like this, given the geopolitical circumstances and all the things that we'd expect politicians should be worried about and all these things. But I think by the time the film ends, you realize that these are actually symbols of resistance in a country and in a place where the act of existence becomes a political act. I think that there's a really important tone of this expression of civic pride and civic dignity as a means to reassert the fact that you do deserve what you feel you deserve, and you do deserve to have these 2 square blocks that are beautiful and beautified, and that's a big project of Musa's throughout the film, and just trying to make this area look beautiful, and there's a lot of pride and dignity that comes from resistance, of course, and it's a strange journey that the film goes on, but I think a beautiful journey where you see these manifestations of civic pride as symbols of resistance. But I think that when I showed the film to Musa, I was hoping that would register, and he said this does feel like a really honest view of how I feel, which was a huge compliment to me, of course.
I mean, I think that there's pretty much every film or book that comes out about this region deals with the conflict pretty head on. And on the first viewing of the film, it seems like it's not a film really about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the face of it. But if you just think about it one more second, the conflict and its entrapment in a way of Palestinians really makes an appearance somehow, maybe through the back door, in almost every issue he deals with. Was that a conscious decision, or was that just how the story played out?
It was absolutely conscious. It was really vital to me to do something differently than what I had seen in other films on this topic. When I say films, I mean documentaries, I mean fiction films, I mean films by Israeli filmmakers, I mean films by Palestinian filmmakers, I mean films by American filmmakers or Western filmmakers or or filmmakers from any other topics. And I'm not saying that I think some of these films are fantastic.
It's a high bar. There are some very good ones.
No, they are fantastic. There are some fantastic films, and I'm not saying that I want to do something different because I don't like them. There are some really wonderful films, but I frequently find that when it comes to the depiction of Palestinians in some of these films, there's either a depiction that I don't personally politically agree with, and that the Palestinians are aggressors and terrorists exclusively and one-dimensionally, or there's a representation that Palestinians are one-dimensional victims and a one-dimensional suffering entity. And in that depiction, even though I do, of course, feel that there's a real concern with the treatment of Palestinians and their access to human rights, I think that representing an entire group of people as one-dimensional victims is another way to erase them, basically. And I feel like there are some fantastic films, especially by Israeli filmmakers, just really, really beautiful, incredibly profound and evocative and stirring films. But also some of these films are primarily positioning the Israeli guilt at the center of the narrative and the story, or Israeli complexity, or difference of opinion within Israeli society. And even in those films, which again are really sometimes really well made, there's the Palestinian is essentially just a tool to interrogate.
So is that why Ramallah played this role so well? Because it's seemingly a normal city, not the cliched Palestinian town that comes to mind. One of the reviews, I think it was the Hollywood Reporter, said that Ramallah, called it the paradox of Ramallah. That it wants to be like any other city in the world, but cannot. Was this your thinking as well?
Before you answer, I'm going to pile on, which is something that Gilad and I love to do, but I think it's a related point, which is, were you seeking consciously, or is it my interpretation, that presenting Ramallah as a normal city, paradoxically, changes the frame of expectation in the sense that it portrays Palestinians as any resident of any big city in the world with the same expectations that you and I might have of our local government, as opposed to portraying them as these, like you said, victims who are, getting killed in clashes or killed in the conflict. And somehow it's sort of a soft prejudice of low expectations for their quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that every film has a built-in journey to it. And the way this film begins is very much depicting Ramallah as this idyllic place in the first 5 minutes. And that spell is broken very, very frequently. It's a rule of the storytelling that continues to collapse on itself as the film continues. And part of that is to begin the story of the film and to the story of Ramallah through the eyes of its mayor, who's essentially working to try to create a place where it does feel like it could be any other place in the world. Of course, he knows, and every Palestinian knows, that Ramallah is not like every other place in the world, and Ramallah is not like any other city, and Palestine's not like any other place. But there's the desire to have it, nevertheless,
right.
And there's the desire to represent that, nevertheless. And I feel like I really love the work of Armando Iannucci, who's a satirist who made this TV show Veep and In the Loop, and this film Mayor. I think it's rather funny at times, and especially in the way that it deals with bureaucracy. But something that always stuck with me that he would talk about is how he would define satire and how satire works, and he would say something like, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, he's like, satire only works if there's a series of accepted conventions, and you point out when people depart from those conventions. And I feel like with the representation of Ramallah and Palestine and Mayor Musa in this film, I think I'm using the traditions and the conventions of like Hollywood storytelling in the first 10 minutes. You're hearing very classical music. It, I think, reminds people, I've seen in reviews, some people say it reminds them of Woody Allen's Manhattan.
Absolutely.
It reminds people of like Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
Not at all.
whatever works, I'm happy with, because what I'm trying very actively to do is to say, yes, you're not watching a film about conflict for a second. That might come later. That doesn't matter. But what I am telling you is this is a simple story, and I think that documentaries in particular tend to go so large. I think of it like foie gras filmmaking, where it's like, how many ideas can I shove down your throat as an audience? And I really I believe in the power of small stories.
Okay, I have to ask you about the role of humor, because you raised it, and I do think it's an essential part of the film. And I want to ask you maybe just to give us a couple of examples of what you thought were the funniest moments that maybe break those conventions or contain something counterintuitive. I can tell you mine, but I'd rather hear it from you.
Oh, I would so rather love to hear yours.
Really? Okay, I'll tell you the first one. The one that just really stuck with me because I loved it is when a local priest, comes in to consult with the mayor about how to cope with the potential for turmoil, knowing that President Trump is about to declare Jerusalem the capital of Israel. And the mayor says, wait, that's happening? Like, he's going to announce it today? He doesn't know. And then he says to his office manager, do we have cable? And she says, no. And he says, so why do we have a television? And she says, in case we get cable. And it's just, I love that scene. I'm not even sure why I love it. I just love it.
I think I know why you love it.
Tell me.
I think it's probably why I love it, which is that, again, it's breaking from the expected in a degree. I think that and it also hints and suggests the limits of Musa's power. Which is a theme throughout the film, and the limits of autonomy and the limits of power, and the fact that this guy who's running his city, elected official, 2 terms in office, beloved in all these ways, doesn't have the news at hand. This event being hoisted upon Palestine without its understanding and knowledge, I think speaks to the absurdity of it, and it also, it breaks our understanding a little bit. I think that's the really beautiful way that humor can be used in storytelling as a way to bring people closer to reality, in the same way that, honestly, if for anyone who's ever lost a loved one from a long illness or from cancer, you know the way that humor can come into your life in this strange way as a coping mechanism, as a way of resistance, basically, even if something like that has nothing to do with politics at all. And what I would notice time and time again in Ramallah and in Palestine is the very dark humor that grows around the ubiquitous nature and absurd, endless nature of occupation, that people need to find ways to deal with it.
True. I'm going to make one more comment about that and then turn it over to Gilad. I think I liked it for another reason, which wasn't about the humor, but about a sense of naivete. This is a politician who's not connected, by an IV line to the mass media. He doesn't have television. He hasn't read a newspaper. He doesn't even have a radio. And it's almost like up until then, you just see him kind of shaking hands and people calling out, "Hi, Mr. Mayor," and he knows people by name. And I think that also was very kind of heartwarming, that he has a sort of much more grassroots connection with the population, to the point where he's not a typical politician who's connected to the media. That's, absolutely. I think I'm going to add that.
Right. Let me take you to another direction. That is the technique that you used, the so-called fly on the wall. You let the scenes speak for themselves. There's no narration at all, if I'm not mistaken. And my question is, how did you make the choice to use that technique? Is it after you shot and the raw footage just, lent itself to it? Or was it also a conscious decision in the way that you didn't want an American narrator to tell a Palestinian story?
Well, I certainly didn't want to have my own voice or an actual voice speaking that wasn't a Palestinian voice. That's not the style of films that I make, and I that didn't seem appropriate for a film like this. All the films that I tend to make are these. The term is verite, like verite films, where you're filming and generally the people in the film are speaking for themselves and advancing the story the way that a fiction film would. And I did want this film to feel more like you were watching a fiction film, not that you're thinking anything is not real, but in the sense that the story is emerging through actions, through visual storytelling, through emotion, and through tone. That was very important to me, especially because of what we were talking about earlier, that I did want to make a film that didn't ground you in the same sort of documentary there, but for the grace of God, shaky camera, filming chaos and violence, which is so frequently how Palestine's captured in documentary film. And I wanted to do something that felt more grounded and something that felt more dignified to match Musa's tone and his energy. And that felt appropriate. So I filmed about 350 hours of footage for this film. And a lot of it is in this cinematic style that you're seeing, locked off.
Does it just sound a lot, or is it really a lot for a?
Sounds like a lot to us.
Yeah,
it's about middle for me. It's certainly a lot, but it's
not unusual.
It's not unusual. No, for a film like this, where I was filming off and on for about 18 months, filmed around 120 days of footage. I would say it's a fair amount, but a lot of that was interviews that didn't make it into the film, other characters that didn't make it into the film, the wider angle of Ramallah. Initially I was thinking, how big can this story possibly be? And the more I filmed with Musa and his staff and the works of the municipality, the more I focused onto the story, the more I realized that was the core of the story. It was the most relatable thing. It was the most interesting thing. There was the most evolution in it. And Musa was frankly the most excited person of all the people I filmed with. And I think that you can't overstate the importance when you're making a film about real people. The willingness that those people have to be in the film improves the film and improves the quality of the footage you're getting.
Speaking of people in the film, there are two scenes that jump out at me also. One is when he walks into a classroom of little kids and they all shout in unison, "Welcome to our third grade." It's really adorable. But there's another scene in which he speaks to a group of older students. I assume they're doing some sort of degree in issues of, I guess, public policy probably. They're interested in local governance, and he talks to them about what it means to be in local governance. And he exalts the point of local governance, explaining that it can really serve people and make the concept of government legitimate. But we have to take I was curious, there's almost no critical angle in the film. There's nobody saying, well, on the other hand. But the other hand, I think, in any society is that local governance is also venal. Politicians are corrupt, and Palestinian public opinion research shows us that Palestinians are extremely critical of their government at the national level. I can only assume there's discontent at the local level as well, charges of corruption. Did you hear any of that kind of grousing or complaining or suspicion on the part of the people? I'm not telling you to incriminate the mayor, but I mean, these are normal parts of the relationship usually between residents and their government of any kind.
One of the reasons I was most excited and eager to actually ask Mayor Musa to be in this film and to make this film about the municipality is I would hear even from his detractors, even from people who didn't agree necessarily that modernization and development of Ramallah and knocking down older buildings and building malls and doing this sort of style of modernization that Musa was more interested in. Even from his critics, I would hear a sort of universal, like, thank God he's not corrupt. Oh. And that was a really exciting prospect to me of just imagining that, I live in New York. I can't imagine that the critics of my elected officials would say at least they're not corrupt. I feel like I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that about an elected official. And that was really striking to me, because that is generally the first path of criticism of an elected official. And this seemed to be the last thing that anyone would say. And this is not a situation where it's like, this is not a thing that people say about leaders, obviously, like you just alluded to, this is a very common charge against leaders. So that was really enticing to me, that there was no impression, whether you agreed with Musa or not, that he was bought and sold by anyone.
Let's move now to the musical score of the movie. That you yourself are a composer. The thing that really struck me was that it's much of it is Western classical music, and why is really the question. Is it, to me, it looked like there was some sort of like an ironic dimension to this choice.
Although I will say that I heard one point on the second viewing, when I heard something that sounded to me like it might have been an African folk chant or something. I wasn't sure, but let's hear about your musical choices.
There was a bit of Arab music as well here and
Some
there,
Arab
but
music.
Well, I'll address both of your points because you're both right and you're both wrong. Which is great. So the music that you're hearing in the film is it's mostly two different composers, both of whom are Japanese. One is a group called Toru Takemitsu, a composer named Toru Takemitsu, who makes music that you're describing as Western, but was a Japanese composer and was making compositions entirely unique to his own his own spirit. But I remember always just hearing his music and thinking this belongs in a film, and I'd love to make the film that could be the spirit for this music, because it does feel so gorgeous and like golden age of Hollywood feeling in this way that when it's included in the film, as you say, I don't necessarily think of it as ironic. I think that feels a bit sinister, but I don't dismiss that reading either. I think of it more as just this creates a mood and a tone, and I think that when you're watching that music applied to landscapes of Ramallah, I think that there's a dissonance there that moves you. Because I know it moves me. When I first played in the edit room and put in that music underneath these Christmas time images of Ramallah, it was moving to me. I'd never seen that. I'd never seen Ramallah represented in a way that didn't couch it within the ode music playing and the sunsets and the camels. And I wanted to do something that would provide some dissonance, constructive dissonance. And I think that audiences are smart, which is not a thought that I think a lot of my American peers ascribe to in Hollywood. but I generally think that if audiences are smart and they can go along with something, and they can have I think audiences are emotionally intelligent, and they're also like emotional 5-year-olds. And when you watch something that moves you, that sticks with you, and that informs your knowledge as the film continues. And the other group in the film is a group called Jino Yamashiro Gumi, which is a Japanese prog rock band from the 70s and 80s, who are most famous for doing the soundtrack to a Japanese anime film called Akira in 1987. And that group travels around the world recording folk music with indigenous musicians. And some of them are singing, and then they have some indigenous musicians singing. And so you're hearing music in the film from Mali, you're hearing music in the film from Georgia, you're hearing music in the film from Korea, from China. And there was something really powerful in that to me too, about this idea of the universality coming through this vocal work, and just basically having a musical score where you're like, where am I? What is that? Where am I exactly? What is this exactly? And I just found that to be another really powerful way to ground the film in a more universal experience for people watching it.
I'm getting all these associations in my head. It's just totally off track, but that really reminds me of a film called The Cold War. I think it was called The Cold War. And the premise is that people go around, it's set in the former Soviet Union. People go around and they go around recording the music from all the republics of the Soviet Union. And that's the basis that's the start of the plot. Anyway, that's my recommendation today.
That's a great film.
Oh, you know that film?
Oh, yeah. It's a beautiful film.
Right. So, I mean, I think that part of the reason why music is so important, and this music is so important, is because it does convey a sense of curiosity and often optimism or something uplifting. And I guess it just stood in very stark contrast to every time in the film the issue of the conflict comes up in a more explicit way, especially, again, when they're faced with Trump's imminent announcement of announcing that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and they know there's going to be clashes, and the mayor's discussing it with his aides, and he says at one point, well, we're doomed. And it stood out to me because it's really a contrast to his sort of can-do, very practical and rather optimistic mood throughout the film. I'm not sure what my question is, but is that, I guess, is defeatism for him as rare as it looks in the film? And is it brought out primarily when he faces issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I don't quite know. I think that defeatism is a natural consequence of occupation, I think. And I think that I've had people watch the film who tell me that by the end they feel so uplifted and moved. I've had people watch the film at the end telling me they're so deeply depressed for the state of Palestine. I think it's a question that would I think be primarily one for Musa to answer, to be frank, because for me, I think that it's all shades of gray. I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about, and there's a lot to be very deeply pessimistic about, and there's so much that can certainly feel damning and dooming and all these things, but there's also a resilience that I think typifies and defines Palestinian existence, especially for the people of Ramallah, the people of the West Bank. And I think that that's something that Musa would, if he were sitting in this interview with us here, I think that's something that he would agree with.
To me, it sounds like he really embodies the tragedy of Palestine. You mentioned earlier that he's the sort of Palestinian that people around the world love to see. You know, he's not corrupt, he's wearing a suit. It reminds me a bit of the former Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, who ran on the same ticket of, state building from the ground up. And the Palestinians were promised many times, especially in the aftermath of Yasser Arafat's death, that if they choose a leader that's anything but what Arafat was, right? Not wearing a military uniform, not corrupt, not half-hearted about being against the armed struggle. And, it failed for Fayyad. It seems to be not working so well for Musa Hadid as well. Do you agree that it's really the tragedy of Palestine in many ways?
I think that Musa represents just one facet of the Palestine of the tragedy of Palestine. The only fear I could ever possibly have is that people would watch this film and think that this is the entirety of the Palestinian experience. And I really wanted to focus it on as very clear that this is Ramallah through Musa's eyes. Even Ramallah is so much more complex than this film, let alone the entirety of Palestinian experiences. Musa is Christian, Musa is not Muslim. Musa is from a middle-class family. Musa is not a refugee. There are so many different angles of the Palestinian experience that this film can't come close to conveying, and nor would it frankly be within my knowledge set or jurisdiction to be able to convey it. The only reason I felt like I, as an outsider, could even make this film is because the focus was so small, and it was just about this man and his job and the work that he wanted to do. But that said, I do think that as you're talking about it, and as we were talking about earlier, with Musa essentially performing respectability politics, which is not to his fault. But again, it's because it's what the world has repeatedly asked of Palestinians. No, of course, he's still rejected anyway. Of course, Palestine is still rejected anyway. There's a scene in the film where, he's going out being an ambassador, and he's met with, can we send a choir group your way? Can we send some footballs to Palestine to help with the occupation? And this is the limited way in which worldview accommodates Musa's struggle. And that, I think, of course, to me speaks to a whole set of other themes wherein, of course, the idea of we'll work with any leader other than Arafat, of course, is not true. We will accept nonviolent resistance. Of course, that has not been true, as evidenced by responses to the BDS movement. I think that there's a very fraught landscape wherein we essentially, what kind of resistance we'll accept or not.
Yeah. Well, I have to say one last thing, that Trump's declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is traumatic also for the Tel Aviv Review, because as some of you may remember, it happened exactly at the same time as a live event that we did in London with Ian Black discussing his book, and many confirmed members of the audience had to cancel at the last minute. So, it registered with us as well, not just with the Palestinians. Sorry.
It's said in solidarity.
Yes, exactly. On this note, David Ozet, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about your film, Meir.
Thanks so much for having me. And just a reminder to audiences, it's available now on meirfilm.com.
Certainly. And many thanks also to Itai Shalem, our sound engineer and producer, and again to the German government for sponsoring this special series. And now we've got a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review of any kind. All you have to do is just go to the ratings and review section and trash us or praise us or whatever you fancy. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 600 interviews, especially for you during the coming lockdown season. And if you like us, you can also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast Ideas from Israel. Follow me and Dalia on Twitter, and do not forget to join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me and from Dalia, goodbye.